Gaze reading where the greats drop by. Trendy authors tell us all the who, what, and why. Anyone can listen, cause we're spoiler free. Gaze reading, from Pulitzer stars to book club picks, where the curious minds can get their fix. So you say you're not gay, well that's okay. There's something for everyone. Gaze reading.
Hello and welcome to Gaze Reading. I'm your host, Jason Blitman, and on today's episode, I have author Sameer Pandya talking to me about his new book, Our Beautiful Boys. And then my guest gay reader on today's episode is Emma Donoghue. You know her as the author of Room and The Wonder, and both of their bios can be found in the show notes. In case you haven't heard, I just started a Gaze Reading Substack. There you'll find author Q&As and reviews and live recordings of conversations from in-person events and other super exciting content that you cannot get anywhere else. So make sure to check out the Gaze Reading Substack. There is a free option so you could get a glimpse of what is in there. Head on over to the Instagram link tree, and the link is also in the show notes. There are so many books coming out today. A couple that I want to shout out. The prequel to Wicked, which of course is the prequel to The Wizard of Oz, but the prequel to Wicked by Gregory Maguire is Elfie, and I'm excited to check that out. Also, of course, Harriet Tubman live in concert by Bob the Drag Queen and Paradise Logic by Sophie Kemp are some of the books that I am most excited about. As always, if you like what you're hearing, share us with your friends, follow us on social media. We are at Gaze Reading on Instagram and on Blue Sky, and you could watch this content over on YouTube as well. And if you like and subscribe to Gaze Reading wherever you get your podcasts, you will be the first to know when a new episode drops. And that said, there are 5 Tuesdays in April. And so I'm only going to be releasing 4 regular Gaze Reading episodes because I only really do 4 Gaze Reading episodes a month, but there are 5 Tuesdays. On April 1st, I'll be launching a new series called Spill the Tea, where I'm in conversation with experts in their fields, answering questions that we didn't even realize we had. And I am so excited to share these with you. They have been awesome. That launches Tuesday, April 1st with Elda Ratour. She is the VP and publisher of Penguin Classics. And we talk about what actually makes a classic, and we learn about that whole process. And it is so cool, and she's awesome, and it's such a great conversation. And so make sure to like and subscribe so that you know when that comes out. As I say on every episode, I'm partnering with Aardvark Book Club to provide an exclusive introductory discount to new members. New folks in the United States can join today. Enter the code GAZEREADING at checkout and get their first book for only $4. That is the best deal in town for a new book, and their selection is always so terrific. So head on over, aardvarkbookclub.com, use the code GAZEREADING. The link is also in the show notes and on the link tree. All right, enjoy my conversation with Sameer Pandya and Emma Donoghue. I'm obsessed with your shirt.
Oh, thank you. I was in India in December,
Uh-huh.
and one of the genuine pleasure. So I'm from Gujarat originally, and it's like this home of like incredible textiles.
Mm.
And my cousin took us textile shopping, and I have this profound love of half sleeve shirts. So we got all of these textiles and then went to basically the nice tailor that my aunt has been using for the last 50 years. And this is my shirt that came out of it.
Oh my God. I'm obsessed with that.
Well, it is just so great. And what's just so amazing is she's used this tailor for so long so that 20 years ago when I had gone there, he opened up a notebook and he's checked my name and he found me. And of course, you don't necessarily want to know
What the
what your
No, you
measurements are.
don't. No, you don't.
So it was, anyway, it was just the greatest thing. And so it is. So, yeah.
Not only am I complimenting your shirt, I'm complimenting your one of a kind shirt, your shirt.
It's my shirt. It is my signature shirt, and I don't know when it was, like, there was, like, and so I lived in India, in Bombay until I was 8, where, as you can imagine, it is very hot, a lot, and then at a certain age, and like my father, of course, that was just the uniform, right? Which is really nice half-sleeve shirt, and years later, I found,
Mm.
kind of this photograph, this postcard of the Bengali filmmaker Satyajit Ray, who was always sartorially spiffy, and he was wearing this incredible half sleeve shirt, and I'm like, all right, dude, I have found I have found my kind of the thing that I enjoy. So here we are with my shirt. I love talking shirts.
Sartorially spiffy. What a good phrase.
I think if you're going to use the word sartorial, you have to undo its pretentiousness by adding spiffiness. I think that's all I got.
So professorial of you.
That's I have a day job,
I,
so
I
there you
know.
go.
I read bios.
Yeah,
So
and it's a day job. It's a day job that I like.
that's good. You
Anyway,
don't resent it.
that's where all of this
Wait, now
is.
do you have a whole closet full of shirts where you picked out the textiles and they were made just for you? Oh my God, Sameer, I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
You didn't even say
Oh,
yes. Your face did.
yeah. No, I have some of these, and the thing is, a lot of have sleeve shirt. It's funny because you know, I don't know if we want to talk about this. I'm happy to talk about
Bring it
it, but
on. This is Gaze Reading. We talk about anything.
so for a while, I think my obsession started with these Paul Smith half sleeve shirts.
Hmm.
Paul Smith is that kind of English kind of designer who go. My guess is that, like, when the Beatles were high in their Paisley era, like, they were wearing a lot of Paul
Oh,
Smith,
yeah.
and so I remember I just and the thing is their shirts are so expensive,
Hmm.
and so I remember in the 5 years that we lived in New York, Barney's would have it like big sale, and I would like desperately look for the Paul Smith shirts that were on Serious Remainder. And so that's where all of this started. And like the English, like shirt makers, they just, a lot of times the American shirts tend to be this, right?
Yes.
And I think it's a very specific kind of tailoring where you can see with the Smith, they do this kind of amazing stitching in the back.
Mm.
And in essence, I don't remember what kind of shirt it was that I liked that I was wearing, but essentially what I did was I just took it to the tailor. And so he essentially tailored it exactly, including, this is absurd, including this button here, which
Yes.
I just love. And there are a lot of half sleeve shirts in my
Oh my
closet,
God.
my friend.
I'm obsessed. And India is very high on our list of places to visit. This only makes it higher.
Yeah. And I think at some point I have this, I love orange,
Mm.
and now I'm just a cliche, but I'm a big fan of orange and pink. And I think at some point I had seen a quote in Vulgar Elle magazine
Uh,
where it said, "Pink and orange are the navy blue of India." And
that's
which
interesting. So you are a cliche.
I am a cliche. Well,
Oh
but
my
thank God I
God.
live in California, so then
I
it doesn't matter.
know. It's such a good California shirt. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
exactly.
Listen, as much as I want to learn more about your shirts, and frankly, would not be mad about with a tour of the closet, because now that textile is just so fantastic, I have to see more of them. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about your book, Our
Thank you.
Beautiful Boys.
And I want to show you that the new beautiful hardback
Oh,
arrived
wow. That's
yesterday.
very
And
beautiful.
I have to say, like, one fetishizes objects. I'm really happy to fetishize this one.
For our listeners, tell us, tell everyone, what is your elevator pitch for Our Beautiful Boys?
Yeah. My elevator pitch is um in a party late one Friday night, four boys end up in a cave. Three of them, they have an altercation. Three of them come out, and roughly 40 minutes later, the fourth one comes out screaming and hurt and clearly has gotten into a fight. And in essence, the driving plot of the story is what happened in the cave. And because I'm a sampler, I am essentially sampling this from A Passage to India, which is which was published 100 years ago last year, June
Mm.
2024. And the driving question of that great novel is what happened to the kid.
Interesting. I say that 8 times
Mm-hmm.
because something I wanted to bring up later
Mm-hmm.
is your use of a separate piece in the book. You talk about being a sampler. I had never really thought about that contextually before. And a separate piece, I want to be very clear, was not assigned to me in high school. So I didn't only not read it because I was being a bad student, but I also didn't read it because it wasn't assigned to me. But I wasn't familiar with the plot. And so I did a little research. And upon learning what a separate piece is about, I was like, oh, this is very intentional in terms of sampling. Can you share a little bit about your choice of using a separate piece as a text that comes up in the context of your book?
Where I teach literature for a living. And I tell my own origin story about the books that were important to me.
Mhm.
If I'm trying to be serious or if I'm trying to perform something, I'll say Portrait of the Artist as a young man when I read it was important to me. And it was important to me. Right? As a senior in high school, the first big book we were asked to read, which is incredible, which is Crime and Punishment.
Oh, wow.
So all the big books, right? But in fact, the book that I read in high school that blew me away, that has stuck with me, I'm not going to tell you when I graduated from high school, but now a long time ago, that book really stuck with me is because this is this John Knowles novel. It was not assigned to me. A friend of mine had read it, who was smarter than me,
Mhm.
who said, hey, you want to read this book? I think it's a really interesting book. Um, and it is essentially about two boys in at a boarding school. And it's told, of course, in retrospect, one of the boys at this point, and I don't think it gives away the mystery, has died. And the older, wiser narrator is thinking back on that moment.
Mm.
And when I read this book in high school, I think, of course, when you read books that are important to you, you're like, oh, it's giving my own absurd, sad high school life greater meaning. Oh, our high school lives, our adolescences are never quite as interesting as we would have liked them to be, or as they are in these books, right? But so much of, I think, what I was thinking about then, and I think so much of what I'm thinking about with this book is how do we think about relationships between teenagers,
Mm.
teenage boys in particular? And of course, when I read it in high school, and now I right as I was beginning, the book has stuck with me for so long. And so I could not, sadly enough, find the old copy that I had from high school,
Mm.
which is, of course, heartbreaking. So I found a reissue of it that David Levitt writes the introduction for, right? And what's, of course, fascinating is that he is essentially arguing, I think, in the introduction to the book that the relationship between the boys is not simply platonic.
Mm.
And it is so fascinating for me reading it all of these years later with a very different consciousness in mind
Mm.
and thinking about what that looks like and how we understand it. I realize my writing is about this kind of sampling and rethinking. So let me stop there. You asked me.
Well, so I was going to say, in reflecting what the title of a separate piece means, the sort of coming together of these three different boys to coexist, uh, for lack of a better phrase, in peace, in a world where there isn't peace and they are their own little separate piece, I found to be another element of this book beyond the what happened in the cave question.
Yeah.
Can these boys live together in harmony, basically, in a platonic way, in the
Mhm.
context of your book? Um,
Yeah.
I also want to say this is very much a football book.
Mhm.
Are you a fan? Are you a quote unquote a literal question in the book is someone saying, "Have you ever watched a football game?" For me, the answer is no. Period. I have never watched a football game. Where did the love of football for you come from?
So maybe I can answer this both what you were saying about
Yeah,
a separate piece and then football together, right?
sure.
Because what I realized, of course, and so much of this book is about the opposite of peace,
Yeah,
which is
right.
violence, right? Which is the small violences that these young men or kind of boys becoming young men
Hmm.
inflict upon one another. But of course, the narrator refers to it in the book, the most un-Gandhian of sports, which is American football. And so
Yes.
for me, football was the kind of the sport that best helped me think through this idea that these boys are asked to be violent on the field.
Hmm.
So to your question, absolutely. I watch the game. I have so much trouble with it. I'm so disgusted by it, but I'm watching it. That is, I think the older I get, I'm totally at peace with doing things that are completely contradictory.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, okay, our lives are too short for me to not do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so I love it. But I think that what I wanted to think about was I went to a couple of years before I even started writing this book, I was at a high school football game. And at one point, I noticed that there was an ambulance park. And I asked somebody about it, and they said, oh, yeah, that's a part of their league rules. So I'm like, we're playing a game where the rule is to have an ambulance? There's something really seriously wrong with this.
Yeah.
And there's that, Jason. But then juxtaposed with it is that the crowd's going crazy. And so I think that's what I'm in some ways trying to figure out, which is I think the performance of masculinity on a football field is so over the top. And yet I think masculinity is just way too complicated to be straightforward.
Yeah.
Right? Like there are so many layers of how these young men are being acculturated on this field. So that's the piece of the football. And the last sampling thing I'll tell you, which is the two books I loved in that context is DeLillo's End Zone, which I read years ago about where he does this thing about nuclear war in football. And then Friday Night Lights, right? Buzz Bissinger's book is terrific. And so in some ways, creativity is such a weird, unknowable thing. But I think what happens when you take these 2 or 3 books that have been important, that have been buzzing in your ear, and you like mash them together?
Yeah.
And
You get Our Beautiful Boys.
You get what I tried to create. Yeah.
I recently had R.K. Russell on the show, who was a pro football player, and I was saying to him I'd never seen a game. However, I'm obsessed with Friday Night Lights, the TV show. It's not dissimilar from all of the juxtaposition that we're talking about. I have no interest in watching a game. I don't think I have the patience to watch a game. It is very... I know there are lots of gay people who will tar and feather me to say I love the game, so don't say it's gay people can't watch the game. But I think there's I'm a cliche in that I'm a gay man who doesn't like to watch football, and yet I couldn't not watch Friday Night Lights. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. I loved the character development. I loved everything that one will love about Our Beautiful Boys. It's parallels in that way. So that's what I was going to share with you.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, I think we all want a coach like Kyle Chandler, right?
Oh my God.
Okay,
and a mom like Connie Britton, or a best friend like Connie Britton.
Oh, so that is a part of it. And I have this kind of funny little joke in the book where the Indian American parents who know nothing about football watch Friday Night Lights to figure out what American football is, right? Because that's what it's created. I feel like I know nothing about what Texas football is, but that show did it.
Well, of course, not only is that a joke, that's what they watch in order to understand what it's like. For me, the joke is we'll only watch the first episode. And of course, as a huge fan of the TV show, know how the first episode ends. And those parents are not going to be happy at the end of that first episode.
It's absolute fear, right? Like that's the first argument that they have about when the kid wants to play is he's going to break his neck.
Yeah.
And kind of what happens in the first episode.
It's interesting that you segue this into the conversation about the parents, because the book was secretly or not so secretly about parenthood and about parents and the parent-child relationship and the parent relationship, both amongst in couples, but also amongst each other. It reminded me a little bit, again, talking about sampling. I don't want to say sampling is a new term, but I've not talked about it this much in a conversation before. There were whiffs of the play God of Carnage. I don't know if you're familiar with that, or the movie Carnage.
What's quite interesting is I do not know it, but I can't remember who it was. Somebody, when they first read this book, they said, this is just like the God of Carnage, right?
Funny.
And what's so interesting is when someone says that to me, I am nervous to go check it out, because you just like, okay, I'm going to stick to what I'm doing here. And now, of course, it's between the covers. So I'm done.
Yeah.
So I can go to it. But the interesting thing about the process of writing this book, which was I wanted to write a story about the adults.
Hmm.
And I wanted to, I think in some ways, I'm interested in domesticity
Mm.
and marriage and the complications that exist in family, right? And kind of in families that are not at the beginning or at the end, but rather in the middle, right? Which is how do you manage middleness as opposed to the flush of excitement of earliness and the exhaustion of later, right? And I began to write about these teenagers, right? And I think I will be totally honest, I was nervous to write about, right? It's because you fear corniness when you're writing, right? Which
Mm.
is if I am going to write these boys, I don't want to sound like an old person writing young people,
Sure.
right? And so I kept going back and forth, and the book is where it is, where I've tried to balance out both of these things. But my kind of the thing that I keep returning back to are these three families, right?
Hmm.
And I don't think I sat down and said, I need an Indian family, I need a white family, and I need a Latino family, right? I had Veronica Cruz in my mind. I had a thought of the books she has written.
Mm.
I had kind of Michael Berenger, who perhaps drinks too much and is having a rough go. And then there's a scene where the Gita Shastri, who's the mother, tears down these cupboards in her kitchen. And
Yes.
so I had these three ideas of these people, right?
Yeah.
And so you slowly build. And the idea, of course, is they're totally different. But maybe if I do my job, and I know this is what American families look like. That there are
Absolutely.
ways that there are ways in which they are radically different, and there are ways in which they're dealing with all of the things that all of these families are dealing with,
Hmm.
right?
And I think I say God of Carnage because, listen, I saw the play on Broadway, I think in 2009. So it's been a very
Mhm.
long time. I couldn't quote it to you. I couldn't tell you the exact plot, but what I remember is a vibe, is a feeling, is the idea of kids are fighting at school and it's the parents that come together to solve the problem amongst themselves. I think that's the sort of vibe I was feeling from this. There was zero copying of any kind. It's just that the parents talking amongst themselves when there's trouble with the kids. That's the only element that it invoked in me. But it's interesting that parent story that I saw many years ago on Broadway. I felt some specific way about it that then made me feel some specific way reading about the idea of these parents working something out for their kids because ultimately they want what's best for their kids,
Mhm.
right? And I feel like that's a universal belief.
Yeah,
Um,
but
but at
but
what
but
cost is my real question.
yeah, in that this phrase is interesting, right? To do what's best for the kids, and I think what I've been trying to think through is what if, in fact, what's best for the kids is a displacement of what it is you design,
Mm.
right? That is, and I'm not this cynical, but is the achievement that we want that these parents want from their kids, is it somehow equal to the desire to vacation in the Maldives, right? Are we consuming our children's success in the way in which we are consuming the other things that we consume to show look how good this is, right? Which is,
Mhm.
I'm going to buy a $16 loaf of sourdough and not worry about the fact that it's $16 for a loaf of sourdough. And so I think that's one of the things that I've been kind of curious about, right? Which is at some point, Geeta says something about how, about why she's pushing her kid, right? And she's honest about it. She said it's a reflection of the work that they've done,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's what I was trying to think through.
Yeah. And you have kids.
I have kids. Yeah, two of them. Two
Do
boys.
you feel you learned more about parenting, changed your parenting style, thought in a new way post writing this book?
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think writing the book was an opportunity for me to visit the weird complexity of my own adolescence. And I say that
Mm.
anyone that I like has a weird complexity of adolescence.
100%.
It's
We all do.
like I'm not sure the person who says I had a really normal adolescence is someone I don't really trust,
and
And
I would also
so
like to talk to them. I have a lot of
yeah,
questions.
exactly. What do you
Right.
So I think that on one level it was a desire to figure that out, right?
Mm.
But it was, I think, on something else. I am just because this is also a book about class, right? None of these families are struggling,
Right.
right? Even if a few of them are struggling with their work and don't know where all the money's going to come from, right? They're three well-off families. And
Mhm.
so that's what I was thinking in my particular case, right? So I moved to this country when I was 8,
Mhm.
right? And I mean, my parents are mellow about it, but I do think there was a idea around this notion that they were moving for their own sake, for their own sense of change and of adventure, but also that it's me and I have two older sisters, that we would have different opportunities,
Mhm.
especially my sisters, where I suspect my youngest son in India would have served me quite well, right? There,
Mm.
it would not have been the same with them. And I think what this book helped me think through is what is it that I want, the kind of lives I want my kids to live,
That's
right?
interesting. Yeah.
And when do I get out of the way? When do I say, yeah, you do? I have some ideas on what you should be doing, but I think for the most part, my parents got out of my way, right? Man, I studied literature and wrote short fiction and I write novels. If they had gotten in my way, I would have been a lawyer
Right.
and I would have gone to business school. But
Yeah.
they said, okay, it's what you want to do, so give it a shot. And so
That's
I,
amazing.
I have been thinking a lot about that, which is particularly in the immigrant context,
Mhm.
what happens with the version of me, right? I've been here for 44 years, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm a Californian,
Right.
right? And so what does it mean to look like me and raise Californian children and what to say to them? And that's what I've been trying to figure out.
This brings up a few questions that I had in reading the book. One, which I'll talk about with you in a minute, is about expectations. And Phil Gaucham, the father character in the book, he plays this game, the game of imagining who he would be if he never left India.
Mhm.
Do you play that game with yourself? You just said you don't think you would have had it too badly if you were, because of your youngest son staying in
Mhm.
India. What does that game look like to you? And what, in your fictionalized version of that world, what does that look like?
Yeah, no, was it that Gwyneth Paltrow movie? Was this Sliding Doors?
Sliding Doors has come up on this podcast the last like 6 episodes, and I am both obsessed with it, and also we all need to collectively find a new reference that is
Yes.
not Sliding Door.
Honestly, I don't even know if I've seen it. But
You just like
all I'm
get the
doing
concept
is
of it, right?
I just get the
Right.
concept, right? And it's a really interesting question, right? So when I was back, whatever, I think it was in December of 2023.
Mhm.
What was interesting, for example, the photograph that is at the end of the book
Mhm.
is a photograph that my grandfather took. My grandfather was a portrait photographer, and in South Bombay, near the Taj Mahal Hotel, there's a photo studio called Dave Brothers. Okay, his name was Hilalal Dave, and that is his photo studio.
Wow.
And we walked in there. And why I'm bringing this up is when you're from a place where your parents or your grandparents have been, there's a really interesting experience you have of being a part of a series of generations,
Mm.
right? And had I stayed, there was plenty of that, right? On the other hand, I was a terrible high school student, right? It's not that I didn't try.
Yeah.
I genuinely tried. I sucked at it, right? My terrible SATs, all of this, right? I was, since we are happy with cliches for this conversation, I was just total late bloomer when it came to
Mm.
writing and thinking and all of this stuff. I don't know how well I would have done there
Yeah.
if that was the case,
Interesting.
right? Where it is, I do think it's because it's just simply based on numbers, so many more people,
Mm.
right? it is just such a very different experience, right? But it is, it's like it's such a wacky thought experiment,
Hmm.
right? Is because all of what I have, right? Like I'm sitting in my office, I have a sense of what my kids look like and where I drive to and all of this. The trying to imagine that alternate life is just such a mind melt.
Hmm.
And I like the idea of it, but it also, I think it hurts Geeta's feelings when Gautam says it, right? She's like, but you would have never met me.
Sure.
And
There's something so interesting about you talking about the deep roots of a place because my mom is from Skokie, Illinois. My dad is from Long Island. And strangely, I went to school in Chicago and I lived for many years in New York City. So I lived in the city version of the suburb that they grew up living in. And if they had never left, what am I trying to say? There's something very interesting about legacy and the fabric of who we've become. And even though I never lived in Skokie and I never lived in Long Island, but I did live semi versions of that, there is a part of me that feels like those places are also a part of me, right? I
Mhm.
was a Midwesterner and a New Yorker growing up living in South Florida, even though just because that was a part of my fabric and my legacy. Sort of what you're talking about in terms of
Yeah.
the legacy existed for you in India that you would have not fallen in line with, because I don't mean to say it like that. There was a path. You weren't reinventing the wheel of who you might become, per se.
Yeah. There is also this pleasure in being in a place where that legacy does not exist,
Absolutely.
right? Which is why we love Los Angeles and Palm Springs and California,
Yeah.
right? Where you can feel like, okay, and that's the thing, right? It's so fascinating to me that everyone is, for all the understandable reasons, obsessed with Joan Didion and her California-ness,
Yeah.
right? Where she's so much about like where I was from.
Mm.
And I think so for so many of us, California is a very different space, right? It's a space of openness. And that's what I enjoy, right? I think that there is a way in which you can create yourself in a very different kind of way.
Absolutely. And while you can do that, you're still creating it within the context of the human that you have become.
Mhm.
And that is from that legacy, right? So you're able to forge your own path. You're not following in someone else's footsteps, but you're doing so with the guidance of what you've learned from your past. I guess is, I think, an interesting.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, that stuff you're just not going to leave
Right.
behind. And I
Right.
think
Leave
that,
it behind.
yeah, but then maybe the thing, hopefully, that we do with enough time and enough therapy is recognize in the case when Skokie is showing up
Right.
or when Long Island is
Yes.
showing up, right?
Exactly.
And so just be like, okay, this is where this is coming from,
Right.
right? And it is fascinating still to this day, like just things around like these things that you learn when you're really young, right? About I don't know, shoes in the house or like what you like a backpack. Like, what do you do with a backpack? Do you carefully put it down? Do you throw it? All of these
Hmm.
things, these details that you didn't think were so important to you. If you learned them when you were quite young, they just stick with you in different kinds of ways and shape the kinds of decisions that you're making.
We're sitting here talking about forging our own path, but having a hard time letting go of our baggage. And at the beginning of our conversation, when you're talking about shirts, you were talking about being a cliche, liking pink and orange. It's like, okay, that's that's the baggage,
And
right? Because
and
you're not a
and if you
cliche in California.
and if you're lucky, the baggage is like nice baggage,
Totally. Yes, yes,
right? Like
yes. It's
that's yeah, it's
custom
like
tailored baggage.
It well, it helps,
Yeah,
like, it can be something totally different,
of
right?
course, of
Like,
course. Um,
so
you know, you talking about had you stayed in India, you were not a very good student, that wouldn't have necessarily
Mhm.
gone over very well. It comes back to the conversation that I wanted to have about expectations. Based on our race, our gender, our class, our sexuality, our sport of choice, our instrument that we play, there are all of these societal expectations that come, or expectations and probably cliches that come with all of these things. Some of them are self-imposed, some of them are from outside forces. And this book, I think, breaks the mold and makes you reassess what your own expectations are of these people. I was surprised that they were all great students. And I loved that.
Why is meaning that you were not because they were boys or just who
Because they were
were?
boys, they were jocks, because they
Mhm.
were about to graduate high school. It's easy to, and not only they weren't just passing, they were
Yeah.
exceptionally good students.
You know, what a couple of things about that. So
Yeah.
what I am I'm trying to think through these
Mhm.
boys, right? Because God knows we got to talk about it, right? Because they are thinking about stuff, doing stuff, right? This is in some ways, this is the year of boys,
Yeah.
right? Where I think we need to think about what they're listening to, what they're engaged in, right?
Mhm.
The novel I wrote before this was first person, right? What was genuinely frightening about writing this book was I was like, I'm going to go from point of view to point of view. And that is a scary thing to do as a writer, is because readers, I think, and I as a reader had done this. I'm like, okay,
Mm.
I can't flip to somebody else.
Mhm.
So anyway, one hopes that one does the craft work well, where there's enough signals and things like that. So I was trying to figure that out and to go into their minds and to think about the ways in which they are who we expect them to be
Mhm.
and not. And
Mm.
maybe the one example that we can talk about is MJ Barringer, who is the senior, the quarterback of this team, who, as this novel opens, has basically decided to no longer wear shoes. Right.
I'm so glad you
Um,
brought up. I look forward to circling back to that.
right. It just becomes his thing, right?
Mhm.
In fact, and his father at some point says, I think maybe to him or his wife, says, the people that don't have shoes are the ones who desperately want
Right.
shoes, right? So this idea that this is this kid, he is essentially a golden boy, right? Like this, he has this kind of incredibly strong arm. He is smart. He's a little shy. He is trying to work through all of this,
Mhm.
right? And I think a part of his shyness is based on the fact that he is handsome, right? And there's a
Yeah.
way of deflecting one's handsomeness through pushing away, right? And there's a different version of it, which is the worst version, right? Where you become cocky and terrible. And I was trying to think through how to do MJ in that context. But I think he is in some ways trying to figure out, what does it mean to exist in this really wealthy family that he lives in,
Mhm.
where there are these paintings whose origins he doesn't know, that there's I think one of the things I really love as a writer is to just think about objects, which
Oh.
is, what does it mean for someone to have for there to be a house with 100-year-old sofa where the cover gets reupholstered over and over again. The right idea
Mm.
that you inherit furniture as a marker of wealth, as opposed to buying furniture as a marker of new money. And all of that stuff is, I think, I was trying to work through.
Yeah.
But that is, I do think that what novels I want them to do is to take these characters that both seem familiar, but then to really defamiliarize them.
Defamiliarize them and also provide an opportunity for us to really get to know someone rather than make assumptions. Could you do it? Could you not wear shoes for a year?
Me,
Yeah.
I just, I like shoes too much.
Yeah. Me too.
That's the thing is, I think in a way I have shoes are so fun, and you can really lose a lot of your money buying them, right? Like, and I'm not just talking
Mm.
about this whole sneaker obsession that I'm just so sick of, right? But just in general, right? If you allow yourself the absurdity of it, right? It is endless. So I just simply, and I think personally for me, I feel like my own kind of how I think of my brownness is
Mm.
as a kind of a racial identity where I have directly or indirectly taught myself to disappear,
Mm.
to in the space that exists between blackness and whiteness. I'm just saying,
Mm.
and so what that means is, and that's good and bad, right? I'm not
Sure.
saying it's laudable, nor is it the opposite, right? It is just what I have, how I've socialized myself,
Mm.
right? And in some ways, not wearing the shoes is the exact opposite,
Correct.
right?
Right.
MJ can do it because no one's ever going to question
Right.
it, right? The thing is, if you are being questioned constantly in the social spaces that you enter, what you do to manage it is to upgrade as so profoundly as possible so that no one will question it,
Right.
right?
And
And I
not
think
provide
that's
any opportunity for someone to ask questions.
absolutely
Yeah.
right. The car is as clean as possible. The shirts
Mhm.
are as pressed as
Mhm.
possible. But I also appreciate the fact that MJ is thinking through this is all blood money I'm leaving,
Right.
right?
All right. In a similar vein,
Uh-huh.
I have to ask, there is talk of all of the phases that a teenager goes through in the book. There's someone goes through a mullet phase, the mustache phase, the walking everywhere phase. What was your embarrassing teenager phase?
Yep.
The face you just made.
I will tell. So, can I tell you this? And I can't believe I did this. So, this is quite a little bit before I was a teenager. So, when I arrived here, I was here for third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade.
Mm.
Okay. I moved to a different school um, for sixth grade, right? It was like what, and I said earlier that I was a terrible student. I was a terrible student, but whatever. I moved to what they in those days called a gifted classroom, right?
Mhm.
So
I'm
all of these
familiar.
different kids showed up, and I will tell you that year we put on a play, and I played Romeo, and I memorized that entire thing. I showed up to the first day of class pretending I had a British accent.
Wow.
And
I was not expecting you to say that.
I wasn't either. And I was like, what am I doing?
Wow.
And it was so weird. And I think in a way, part of it was that there were just so many kids in this
Hmm.
classroom that seemed so much smarter and so much hipper and so much more interesting. I was like, I got to find someone.
Wow.
I haven't been out of India for that long, right?
Hmm.
And I think what's just so ridiculous about it is that eventually, of course, it just went away. And I'm sure some of these kids were thinking, like, what happened to that dude's accent? He like sounds like he just sounds normal now. Is that all it takes? Is like 3 weeks in
Right.
this new
Right.
elementary
Oh,
school?
this is
And
assimilation.
so, yeah, exactly. So I think that was like a weird kind of sixth grade thing that I did. I do think so. I think, and then high school was just weird and random. After my freshman year in college, I took a trip to Europe and I did not shave that entire summer so that I could return back and purchase beer from this liquor store because I had to go there and it worked. And between my British accent and my beard might be my two kind of phases that I went through.
Wow. Okay, your kids are not allowed to listen to this episode.
No, so funny. I literally thought about it for a second. I'm like, then what are they going to do? But whatever. It all feels tame now.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you for sharing that. Those are really great examples of the question. And I think it is not dissimilar from the shoes conversation, right? I
Mhm.
think it tells a lot about who we are, the phases that we go through.
Can I ask you, like, so what do you think are these phases our desire to say, I want to try something else? Or I think I'm wondering about your question in terms of what is it that we are doing
Yeah.
when it is that we do all this?
That is a very interesting question to the question. I hearing you ask that back, I think as a society, we have an issue, or we incorrectly call it a phase, or we have an understanding of what a phase means. I think people see phases as a bridge from one piece of
Mhm.
your life to the next. And I don't think that's fair, because that implies that it's not real, or it's not really who you are, or that it will eventually end.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea of wanting to grow out the beard to appear older so that you could buy liquor from the liquor store, that's actually smart. That wasn't a beard phase. That was just a good idea.
Which is That was mature. That was maturation.
Right, exactly. The British accent thing, again, this is me therapizing you, but it is an element of standing out, of showing your individuality. And I imagine part of letting that go was realizing that you don't need that to be individual, and B, leaning into other things that make you individual. So the root of it doesn't actually go away, but the rest of it does. It fades away.
Yeah. In some ways, part of what this book is about, and particularly the case with the narrative strand of Veronica Cruz,
Mhm.
is what this idea of performance means,
Mhm.
right? And that when I think about performance, so my my turn as Romeo in the sixth grade is a performance, right? And we think about it as I was on stage and then I returned back, right? But we do these series of performances, right? And in some ways, part of what I've been trying to figure out with this book and these teenage boys is they are simply enacting these performances, right?
But so are the parents.
That's the thing, right? This is the thing,
Right.
which is the parents aren't done with it,
No.
right? I don't know if our beautiful boys are in fact the fathers in this book,
Right.
right? And the mothers who are all basically carrying them on their shoulders, right? And
I mean, they have their issues too.
of course, and all of them do,
Yeah.
right? And they're rough.
Yeah.
And surely her elbows are sharp.
Yeah.
And she uses those sharp elbows. But I think that's a thing, which is what is the performance that Michael is engaged in if his office is empty and he's been going to an empty office, right?
Before I let you go, I have the most important question of the day to ask you.
No, boy.
Where did butt darts come from?
You know, for those who are going to hopefully read the book, it's a game that appears to go back to our God of Carnage conversation when the parents are gathered to basically drink and figure out what their kids are not telling them.
Mhm.
And Michael Barringer, who is the kind of charming, lively guy who has always uncorked a really nice bottle of wine before you've finished your glass, right? That is his affect, right? And we know
We
that
know
guy,
those people.
right?
Yeah.
We know that guy, right? And so he is wonderful, and I will just whatever. I'll let people imagine
What
what
butt
butt
darts
darts
means,
looks like.
yeah.
It includes a quarter. A quarter is the important, as opposed to a football. You need a quarter,
Right.
and it was in fact a family friend of ours who I thank in my book because I am not going to take responsibility for knowing this game and pretending like I've figured it out or whatever. I am sure there is a great essay to be written about the origins of butt darts, which is an essay that poor Veronica may have to write at some point.
I hope you write
but
it.
I don't know where, but a friend of mine, I was at a party and it was being played and I was just looking and I was like, I cannot believe these are respectable adults.
Did you play?
Doing this? Of course I played.
Were you good?
It took me a while. It takes a lot of good core work. If your hamstrings are a little tight, it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
But look, here's the thing with this game, which is you cannot introduce it too early with a group of people you do not know. Because then you're taking chances and it may just go off the rails.
As I read about it, and I need to try it.
Oh, you have to try it.
I'm very excited.
You just have to. And it's just a question of when in the party it occurs, and it has to be before dessert, is my sense. That if in the lull after dinner is over and people are wondering if they should be leaving, that
butt darts comes out.
That butt darts comes out. Yeah.
Love.
When you were leading up to that, I thought I was going to get there are all sorts of different questions that I thought I was going to get asked, and I'm so really glad that's the question that we ended
with. When I just produced a book festival, there was an author who talked about how we are all villains because we have all done something that made someone feel not great. And that really stuck with me. And reading this book, and again, not to give anything away, but it had me thinking too about those times in my life when maybe I was a villain and didn't mean to be, or didn't like that I was, or tried to push it out of my mind. And I think really helps make us think about the people who we are, the people who we become, the people who we were, how we can all just live in our own little separate piece.
Yeah. No, and it is, and how we think about our future
Yeah.
based on all this, right? Because so much of our living is moving towards there, right?
Yeah.
And how do you use what you just said, right? How do you make peace with whatever has come before as you step into this future moment?
Yeah. Sameer, congratulations. Our beautiful boys out
Thank you
out
so
now.
much. This was a really amazing conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. Emma Donoghue, I am so thrilled to have you here as my guest gay reader on Gays Reading. You are tremendously prolific.
I just can't seem to stop. You know, it just spills out of me. And I think my career, I think I'd have a much cooler reputation if I was slower. If I was like, making you all wait 10 years for a book, people would think I was deep. But unfortunately, it's like the pace you speak at, you can't really help it. You know, if you're someone with verbal diarrhea, that's how you are, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. Listen, it keeps you in the zeitgeist versus the people that sort of shut away for a while to write
I
their
suppose
books.
so, yeah, but I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, it stops me from getting bored, which is the main thing.
Listen, that's all that matters. When I was looking at the list of books that you've published, I was like, oh my God, this is 17?
I'm
that what it
actually not
is?
quite sure of the number.
Crazy.
I don't know. I'd have to check. They all start to blur.
I'm pretty sure it's 17.
I'll take your word for it. It's like my mother had 8 children, right? So her memories of us were a little blurred towards the end. I'd say, like, did that happen when I was a baby? And she'd say, well, you only really remember the first baby. After that, it's just a crowd.
Do you think this is what you're doing? Are you replicating your childhood by just producing more and
I
more
think
of
so,
your own
just to create a
babies?
festive atmosphere. And also it spreads your risk because you're like, any one baby might be a dud. So, but there's lots of babies.
That's so clever. Emma, as my guest gay reader today, I have to know, what are you reading? What's on your shelf? What's on your nightstand?
Well, this is going to sound very lazy of me, but I'm in the middle of the January 13th issue of the New Yorker because, you see, I save them up for traveling. I like to travel super light. I always go on book tour. Like, I'm about to do a 15-city tour. I'll bring one carry-on, okay? And so I can't afford to be bringing paper books. So I bring paper copies of the New Yorker, maybe 2 months worth, and then I just throw them away as I go, as I finish. So right now I would be reading a cartoon from the New Yorker about writing, which is very comforting to me. And then what else am I reading? I'm always reading something for a project that I'm working on. So I'm reading a book called Fighting Proud, The Untold Story of the Gay Men Who Served in 2 World Wars. So yeah, that's for a World War I project I have. And I
Ooh.
need to know about the covert gay action, basically, in World War I.
Interesting.
I'm reading my own book because you have to, because by the time you go on a book tour, you've forgotten it. You're thinking of your next book. And so you can be asked a question in an interview and you can go blank on the name of your main character, which is very embarrassing.
I think you're in the
Really?
minority here, because so many people that I'll interview at their in-person author events or something, I will ask them questions from the book and they're like, did I write that? I haven't read the book in so long.
That's the thing. And you
So,
don't
yeah,
want
I
to give
think
your
that's
audience the
very smart of
impression
you.
that you're like bored with it or anything. So yeah, I always reread and I mark up, I attach little sticky labels marking up which passages might be good to read from, because I love
Mhm.
giving readings. And not all authors enjoy that, but I really like to do all the different voices and ham it up. I find that great fun, as well as the
Mhm.
Q&As, which are, I think, what readers like best nowadays when they're meeting authors. They love to be able to ask you highly specific questions. So yeah, I have to mark up which are good.
At the beginning of this conversation, we talked about conversations and how beautifully segued they can be, and you just beautifully segued me into talking about your new book. But I don't want to talk about that yet.
Fine. Well,
because I want to take us back to the January 13th New Yorker, because I am recently a New York Magazine subscriber. And the first time I got my physical copy, I was so excited. I didn't read it cover to cover, but I like did a pretty good job at covering most of the issue. But now I have a bit of a backlog and I'm regretting getting the physical copies. But bringing them while traveling is
It
such a
really
smart
is.
idea.
And it means also when you're traveling, you're in a slightly more ruthless frame of mind anyway. You're just, you're killing time. So I think the trick with any magazine is to let yourself skip any article that's not ringing your bell. Do not feel you have to read it cover to cover, because then you won't. And then you'll associate the magazine with nothing but guilt, and that would be a shame. So, I mean, the New Yorker is so well written that I have often found I'm fascinated by a 10-page article about like apple harvesting or something that I had no prior interest in. But equally, if they're going very deep dive on American politics at the state or city level, and if we're halfway into this congressperson, and if it's not doing it for me, I just move on 5 pages to the next thing. So let yourself read them very much in a spirit of pleasure and whim and curiosity. There's no point making them into a rod for your own back.
I appreciate this. I didn't know how much I needed this right
Permission
now.
to
This little
skip.
PSA and moment of support. Yes, thank you. Okay, you gave me a beautiful segue. I'm going to go back to said beautiful segue. You are rereading your own book as you prepare to go on tour. That would be The Paris Express by Emma Donoghue, the 17th book. Crazy. Tell us, do you have a log line for the book yet? An elevator pitch?
I would say it's the true story of a disaster that happened in Paris in 1895. And it was a disaster of speed. A train came into Paris too fast and couldn't stop. So that makes it right there a little parable of runaway capitalism, a little parable of our misguided faith in progress and tech, and our ruthless pursuit of the comfort and convenience of the rich over the workers getting, severed and smashed along the way. So the Paris Express is very factual in that it's about a very real crash, and the story, starts as the train takes off and ends when the train stops. But within that, there's a huge cast, because I decided that Paris in the 1890s was such a hub. It was like, I don't know, New York City in the 80s or something. It drew people who were, scientists and inventors and troublemakers and anarchists and queers and feminists and foreigners. So it was this amazing kind of magnet. And so I decided I'm going to put these real people in the book, because I don't know everybody who was on the train, but these people could have been on the train. So I literally just Googled who was around in Paris in the 1890s, and then chose the people who would be the most interesting for my purposes.
Oh, how fun.
I didn't always know in advance whether they were the right people, because sometimes I would research them thoroughly and I'd write a few scenes, and then I'd be like, I'm sorry, you're not earning your place, because you may have a great backstory, but on this particular day, you're just sitting there on the train eating peanuts, aren't you?
Is there someone that you miss?
I did some scenes from the point of view of the dancer, Loie Fuller, the one who danced in amazing silks and gauzes. But unfortunately, on my train, she wasn't dancing. So she just she failed to entertain me,
Dancer's just sitting. Are they really a dancer?
Exactly.
Who have said that you have, you write, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but something about how you write where people are in some kind of peril. That's your go-to. World right now where we're like always in peril. I feel like it's a good thing and a bad thing that you have so much to choose from.
That's true, but a book offers the comforting sense, the comforting illusion that there's a pattern that makes sense. You drop a hint and then it pays off. You open a possibility and then you resolve that storyline. Life is so messy and random, and bad things happen to good people. But in books, you can make it more that, plot often does emerge out of character. I mean, okay, some random bad things happen. Somebody who dies in this book, totally not their fault. But equally, at the level of subplot, you can see individual moments that arise out of character. So, for instance, one thing I could tell from researching this train crash is that it happened because some rich guy basically asked for a special stop. He said, the train is only stopping 4 places. I want you to stop in my country village and let's hitch on my private carriage. And this added 10 minutes to the journey, which you might think was not a big deal. But the crew were under such pressure from the railway company to get to Paris on time every day for the convenience of the guests that they basically took a risk in order to try and make up those 10 minutes. So I would say the whole thing really does grow out of the asshole rich guy character, which, again, is a very modern theme, rich assholes who have brought on disaster on us all. We can all think of a few names there.
At the very beginning of you describing this, you said that novels provide a comforting sense, and then you corrected yourself and said comforting illusion.
That's right. They're far.
Which, you know what, Emma? That's not very comforting.
They are. I don't know. Comforting is the wrong word, maybe. It gives us a sense of order and pattern. The pattern is sometimes rich assholes are destroying the world, but they shape things, because what stresses out a lot of us nowadays is the sheer number of headlines we see, the sheer number of things we hear about in all those different countries, and I sometimes think, 2 centuries ago, I wouldn't have been worried about that, civil war breaking out far, far away, because I wouldn't have known about it, or at least not in time to worry about it. So many of us are frazzled and overstimulated and freaked out, and we don't know how to read the headlines and then turn back to our day. We don't know how to divide our energies between the faraway things or the future things, the, recession's not yet here, and the past things. So a novel is better shaped than life. So yeah, you can put a lot of scary and messy things in there. And this novel is, features, for instance, an anarchist who basically thinks the entire society is evil and that they have to literally burn it all down and restart. So, it's a novel with plenty of social protest in it, but it is shaped, and there's a certain maybe aesthetic comfort to that. It's not quite as messy as real life.
Well, and not only that, though, but I do think there is a comfort, for me at least, that history tends to repeat itself, and that can be for better or for worse. I think it's just comforting to know that we have, as a society, made it through, right?
Absolutely.
So sort of
during COVID, I was just finishing up a novel set in a previous pandemic, the flu of 1918, and I found it very comforting that people had got through worse before. And that the same things tend to happen, like, governments blaming poor people for their dirty, overcrowded living conditions. But, you all get through in the end. So yeah, the long perspective historically is very comforting, especially on, say, issues of social justice. Like there's a moment in my novel where, Dreyfus had just been sent off to an island as a spy, and everybody in France thought he was an evil spy. We now know with the long perspective that he was a victim of anti-Semitic framing and he was completely innocent. They didn't. And somebody mentions his case as an example of where, one journalist she knows thinks Dreyfus may be innocent, but it's going to take so long to try and prove that to anyone. So equally, there's another moment when somebody notices a woman is wearing earrings made of hummingbird heads. And he's aware of the kind of anti-bird exploitation campaign. And again, in those days, it would have seemed impossible to ever persuade women to stop wearing birds as decoration. Little moments like that where you glimpse the exhausting social justice causes of the past, it definitely gives you a little bit more, gas in the tank to keep going today.
I mean, you have also called yourself a compulsive time traveler. Keep dipping back into historical fiction for comfort, or what do you think brings you to these different times?
Yeah, it's more like what makes you travel. It's not exactly comfort. It's certainly not coziness, but it's a trip. It's wild. It's different. It stops you from feeling just stuck in the routine or stuck in the confines and limits of your own particular life. I mean, I've got a really happy life, but like most happy lives, it's relatively samey, right? Extremely happy 31-year relationship, that does not produce much narrative, So then in my books, I want a lot more to be happening. So for me to do something like write a novel about, early medieval monks landing on an island and trying to survive there, it literally gets me out of my own life, and it helps me to empathize with people who are utterly different from me, and it works your heart,
Yeah.
because when I write a page from the point of view of someone, even if he's a mad, zealous, patriarchal monk who's trying to punish the other monks by making them stand up to the neck in cold water, for that page, for the length of time I'm writing that page, I see things from his point of view, and I think that's an exercise we should all go through, to understand and sympathize with, or at least laugh at the sheer differences of others.
Any characters like that are so different from you ever change the way you see something?
Yeah, in one of my previous novels, The Sealed Letter, one of the 3 point of view characters is a husband who was an admiral, and he was very stiff and judgy, and he basically hauled his wife into court to prove that she was cheating on him, and he cast her off so she'd never see her kids again. So, I knew I wasn't going to like him as much as the wife or the wife's girlfriend. But when I was writing his passages, I got totally into his point of view. For instance, he was super tall, so when he served on a ship, he had to lie curled up, and at a certain point he made a little sort of aperture in the wall to put his head in. So I was living in his very tall body, and I was thinking about men's clothes, for instance, and they're starched collars that literally dug into your throat. And I remember thinking, gender is a prison, whether you're the boss or the undervalued one, these arbitrary rules, like men have to wear pointy collars, are limiting to everyone. So yeah, for me, it's been hugely educational, and it opens my mind to write from people's point of view who aren't me. And in this novel, The Powers to Express, I've adopted as many different points of view as would fit, really, because I really loved the multiplicity of it.
Thank you for sharing. I think people often talk about quote unquote walking in someone else's shoes gives you empathy, but I think for you to just to share that little anecdote, and to say oh, maybe he was a little bit of an asshole because his collar was extra pokey that day. There's
exactly.
It really does give you a tiny bit of empathy, even when someone is being terrible. I know you love living in the world of theater. Are you working on anything in the theater right now?
Yeah, well, actually, you asked me about my reading. So one of the things I'd be reading is I'm reading a play because I'm a bit of a stage mom. My daughter is a young actor, so she lets me do things like choose her monologues for auditions and stuff.
Okay, Mama Rose.
Exactly. You says how easily I could, go to the bad side here. So she's got a callback coming up, so I'm reading through the play and marking passages and so on. So it's great fun to have this kind of sideline, which is literary. But yes, I have a play coming on this summer, which is my first musical. It's a folk musical, meaning we're using traditional Irish songs to help tell the story. So it's at the Blythe Festival here in Canada this summer, and it's basically about Irish emigrants in the 1840s, but I'm using those traditional songs to tell the story, and I'm having such fun with it. It's probably one of the easiest things I've ever written. It's just coming.
Oh wow, that's so exciting! Congrats. Okay, as my guest gay reader, I have to know, do you have any grievances you need to air? Anything petty you need to get off of your chest?
I'm reading a wonderful book by somebody I'm doing an event with in Virginia, a champagne and cake themed event, which again is a first for me. I'm not sure there's been any cake at any of my events, and certainly no champagne. So this is delicious and Southern hospitality at its best, I think. So this is The Wilds by Louis Bayard. And he's new to me, but I am now ordering everything he's written before because this one is just fabulous.
Okay, well, my petty grievance is that I've never had cake at a book event I've ever done, and I need to change that. I'm sending a note to everyone who I'm coming up working with to say we must.
And this is how great social justice campaigns begin. They start with a petty grievance, and then everyone else is like, yeah, me too, man.
See, you've never had one, and you've done so many book events. How is this possible? Your odds have been in your favor.
You should always associate, a delicious thing with whatever new habit you're trying to inculcate. So anytime I've brought my kids to the theater, I've bought them expensive chocolate or anything they like at the interval. If there are 2 intervals, I buy them 2 things. So of course they associate performance with deliciousness. So it should be like that with cake. There should be at least a sampling tray as we enter a bookstore, shouldn't there?
Oh, you
Yeah.
are so Pavlovian with your children. How funny. They have some delicious chocolate, then they expect to see some Noel
and
Coward.
then they end up wanting to go into theater. This is what I've brought on myself.
I know. This is a blessing and a curse,
Hey,
Emma.
who am I to say that you shouldn't pursue a
Oh,
life
my
in the
God.
arts? You know, it happened to work for me.
Well, no, of course. As a person with a degree in theater who now randomly hosts a book podcast, it could take you on a very long and wonderful and winding journey, much like a train ride.
I find everything's like a train ride when you're writing a book about a train. You know, it just becomes the omnipresent metaphor.
Emma, thank you so much for being here.
It's been just lovely. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure chatting.
You too.
Have a great rest of your day. Samir, Emma, thank you both so much for being here. Everyone, thanks for listening. Don't forget to tune in next week for the very first episode of Spill the Tea featuring Elder Ratour. And I will see you then. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.